So here's something that is pretty interesting, and I think a lot of you guys would love it. We all know that Blender's animation have seen significant improvement over the years as it has evolved steadily into this robust suite for creators, and historically Blender has actually been compared to Maya and other industry standard tools. But in reality, Blender has gradually carved its own niche, especially among indie creators and small studios. However, one interesting area that has actually sought updates over time is Blender's animation toolset. And today we have something that is pretty interesting that would actually change the dynamics a little bit, especially for those working with industry standard tools like Maya. You know, for some time now, animators have actually relied on various add-ons to do a couple of things. For example, animation layers, several animation toolsets have actually been possible by add-ons in Blender. However, the Blender developers are also promising something to happen sometime within the year, which is Animation 2025. Of course, we've started seeing a couple of glimpses about it with Baklava, which actually promises to be more of what we have with animation layers, but maybe a bit more robust in some sense. And we've also seen some interesting little things that might make their way to Blender later in the coming years, which will definitely deal with node-based rigging, just like what you have with Maya. And speaking about Maya, there is this very cool and interesting add-on that is now available that sort of rivals something that a lot of Blender artists have actually wanted to work with over time, and that is the set-driven key. Set-driven key by default is an amazing tool which is pretty vital for making rigs more intuitive, efficient, and scalable. While they might not be used in every single animation project, they seem to be the cornerstone of many professional pipelines, which actually enables animators to create polished, controlled, and dynamic animations with ease. And their importance simply grows with complexities depending on the rig that you're working on. And seeing that come to Blender in form of an add-on is super interesting. By default, Maya has its own way of working with this, and it is quite interesting how it works. So if you like to work with this, once you pop up Maya, you can simply switch your tabs to animation, and you can simply go over to the key menu, go over to set key, and this presents you with a dialog box. Now within that dialog box, you can select any of the objects that you like to be the driver, and you can select multiple objects. And in this case with Maya, there's just a plethora of things that you can select to be driven by any single thing. So whether you're trying to drive, parameters, attributes of any object, you can simply rely on the set-driven key to drive these parameters and attributes independently. This works with both meshes, rigs, materials, colors, and literally anything that exists inside of Maya. More so, this also works with custom attributes as well. So you can simply select the driver, select the attributes that you like to control, select multiple attributes on different objects on a driven model or on driven models, and you can perform the set-driven key action right there. And you also notice that there's an indicator that tells you that this has also been set. So it is quite robust the way Maya handles this. Now for Blender, how you get to work with this is pretty similar. And for that, we need to go ahead and take a look at Tinkerboy's page where we can download the set-driven key and start working with it. One thing to keep in mind is this works with the action constraint and also drivers. This tool is in constant development, and Tinkerboy is looking at porting most of the features that exist in Maya over to Blender. And this is not to be confused with what we know as drivers in Blender, as by default, once you're working with drivers in Blender, you need an object and you need to drive one particular parameter at a time. Of course, you can link several attributes or parameters to one driver, but this takes quite some time because you need to link these attributes one after the other. Set-driven key, on the other hand, can drive multiple attributes at the very same time, unlike drivers where you have to select one after the other. Now, the set-driven key in Blender works slightly similar to what you have in Maya. But in this case, one thing to keep in mind is this would only work this will only work with meshes that has joints, or should we call them armatures. Now for us to get things going in Blender, all you need to do is get the add-on, and you can simply go over to edit, go over to preference, go right over to where you have your extensions, click right here, and you can install the add-on from this. You can also go over to the add-on section, click on this drop down and install the add-on right here. Now once you install the add-on, if you tap N on the keyboard, you would notice that you have the set-driven key right over here. Now there's a couple of things to keep in mind before you start working with the set-driven key in Blender. One of them is the fact that you need a rigged model that you can access and pose the rigs by simply having the rig selected, going over to the object section and switching this to pose mode. You need to have this. If you don't have a rig which you can pose, of course you can also bind objects to joint and work within the object mode. So for us to get things going, what we need to do is to create a driver. Now for a driver, what we're simply going to do is to bring the 3D cursor right there, and I'm just going to go in, let's actually make that right here, and I'm going to go in, tap Shift and A on the keyboard within the edit mode, and we're going to create a single joint. Now this joint is going to serve as the driver for this particular rig, and what we want to do is to make sure that we can move this joint from one point to another point to actually store a state of this entire vehicle to that joint as a driver. And yes, it is pretty easy to confuse the fact that you can use multiple drivers to achieve this, but that is going to be time consuming, and you possibly don't want to store these as poses either. So in this case, what we're going to do is go over to the pose mode, have this first one selected, and we're going to load this as a driver. We can define a name. So I'm just going to call this driver. We can choose what transform we want and also choose the space. And what we'd like to achieve at the end of the day is for our vehicle to actually behave in this manner. Possibly we would like the wheel to go about this point, and maybe we would like this to go about this point. And of course, we might want this to, have a little bit of a slant. Maybe that's the pose we're going for. And to store this, all we need to do is to have the joints that we would like to work with. So all you need to do is just make sure you have them selected, hold down Shift to select more of these, and you can click on Load Driven. There are controller properties for both the driver and also for the driven as well. Now to get things going, all we need to do is to click on Set Driven Key. We need to have the driver selected, move the driver to the designated points that we want, and we can also go in and make those changes. So the only things you can alter at this point are the joint or the controllers that you've loaded right here. And then the next thing we're going to do, just like we talked about earlier, is to move this right here. So we do have a very interesting pose for this model. So once we have that ready, we can now click on Set Driven Key one more time. Now, once we do that and we have this object selected, if we move back and forth, you can now see that with one simple driver or controller, we now have this entire action. And this is where Set Driven Key actually makes a lot of sense. The same thing can be seen with this mechanical arm, and you can also use this to store various poses that you like to work with later on. Interestingly, you can also work with this within your object mode. So what we have is a couple of parts from this mechanical ship, and we've sort of parented them to a couple of joints. At the same time, we've gone ahead to do the whole Set Driven Key thing, and we've added the driver right here. This driver has a limit transform, which means we cannot go past a certain point. But with what you have here, you can see that we can also go ahead and do the whole Set Driven Key right within our object mode without switching over to the pose mode. And this is also pretty interesting. Other things that you can do with this includes going over here, and you can have access to a couple of other properties and parameters. So for this case, if we would like to switch this, maybe we would like to switch it to the Y location, or maybe to a Z rotation, we can do that too. The same thing also applies to these ones as well, as they do have a couple of properties which you can have access to. And you can also go over here and have access to the target properties, and like we've mentioned earlier, the control properties as well. And it's pretty cool to see that we now have tools like this, which is currently available. It would be nice to see this implemented as part of the toolset that may come over to Blender pretty soon. And for what it's worth, for those who like to take a look at this and possibly you like to support the creator, then you can go over to the link in the description, check this out and start using it. The creator has promised to continually work on this, and most probably we might be seeing potential new and interesting features come over to this in the near future. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section, and of course if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And until I see you guys in the next one, peace.